I still remember the first laugh. It wasn't loud. It wasn't cruel in the obvious way. But it echoed. It was the kind of laugh that sneaks under your skin, slips into your ribs, and settles like a bruise you can't explain to anyone else. It happened in the break room of Maple and Main Consulting, a shiny, fast-talking corporate office full of leather chairs, strong cologne, and louder personalities. I was a new hire, fresh off the waitressing floor, holding on to my administrative assistant role like it might vanish at any moment. And that morning, while pouring myself a cup of burnt office coffee, I said just one sentence. I can fix that spreadsheet real quick if y'all like. 3 heads turned. Cameron, sleek hair, square jaw, and the kind of tie that looked too expensive for someone who typed for a living, lifted his eyes slowly. Sorry, he smirked. Can you repeat that in English? Then came the laugh. Quick, light, cruel in its casualness. It was Laura, the head receptionist. She giggled into her mug, leaned closer to Cameron, and whispered just loud enough. So cute. It's like listening to an old country song. They left the break room chuckling, and I just stood there, coffee going cold in my hands, wondering what I'd done wrong. My name's June Whitlow, born and raised in the Smoky Mountain edge of Asheville, North Carolina. I grew up helping Mama in our small-town bakery, flipping biscuits before school and learning how to speak softly so the dough wouldn't fall. My father passed when I was young, just a whisper of a man in photos, always smiling in his truck. Our home was small. We didn't have fancy things, but we had manners, warmth, grit. I spoke the way my mama spoke, with drawn-out vowels, soft endings, and a voice full of mountain rhythm. But the further I moved from our corner bakery into the real world, the more I noticed the flinches, the tilted heads, the raised brows when I said things like y'all or fixin' to. They didn't hear my ideas. They only heard my accent. When I got the job at Maple in Maine, it felt like a miracle. After years of juggling 2 part-time jobs, I'd finally landed something with benefits, a desk, and a chance. I bought a second-hand blazer, borrowed heels from my cousin, and practiced saying good morning in front of the mirror with my best attempt at a neutral tone. But the city was fast, sharp. Everyone walked like they were chasing something invisible. And I was just me. My desk was near the printer. They called it the hamster corner. Most days, I kept my head down, my voice soft, and my sentences short. I answered emails, filed reports, smiled at people who didn't remember my name. And yet, even in my silence, the way I spoke still found a way to betray me. 3 weeks in, I tried to join the lunch table. They were talking about some software update and laughing about a glitch that turned a client's name into a curse word. I slid into an empty chair and said, "At least it ain't printing it on invoices, right?" Everything stopped for a second. Laura blinked. Ain't it cute how she says things like, ain't? Everyone chuckled. I felt my cheeks burn. I wanted to disappear. But instead, I swallowed my hurt, gave a polite smile, and focused on unwrapping my sandwich like it was a task that required silence. That night, I called Mama. She always knew when something was wrong. Your voice has got that flat edge, baby, she said. Tell me what happened. I didn't want to. I didn't want to sound weak. But the words poured out. The laugh, the glances, the way they made me feel like I didn't belong. All because I didn't talk like them. There was a pause on the line. Then Mama said, "June Sugar, don't let someone shame you for the music in your voice." That voice built our family's life. That voice carried biscuits and prayers and stories down generations. That voice is your power. I cried, because deep down, I knew she was right. But still, being right didn't stop the pain. 2 days later, I was asked to sit in on a department meeting to take notes. It was the first time I'd been in the big glass conference room. The space was all chrome and confidence, whiteboards filled with buzzwords, a coffee machine that spoke in Italian, and people who tossed words like synergy and growth trajectory like darts. Midway through, the senior consultant, Mr. Horace Belton, pointed to a list of ideas and said, "Frankly, none of this makes practical sense." There was a silence. Something in me stirred. I shouldn't have spoken. I was just the assistant. But I raised my hand. "Sir, if I may," I said softly. "I think idea number 3 could work if you roll it out gradually, starting with the smaller vendors. It's just like layering icing on a warm cake. You don't dump it all at once, or it'll slide right off." The room froze. Then Mr. Belton leaned forward. "Say that again." I repeated myself, a little firmer. He stared at me, then nodded. That's actually a good point. My heart thudded. The meeting moved on, but something had shifted. Cameron still sneered. Laura still laughed under her breath. But Mr. Belton glanced my way a few more times, thoughtful. That night, I stood in front of my mirror again. I looked at my reflection, soft curls, warm eyes, and a voice that held generations. And for the first time in weeks, I didn't try to sound like anyone else. I just whispered, "You belong." And for the first time, I believed it. The next few weeks at Maple and Main moved slowly, but something had changed inside June Whitlow. She was still quiet, still polite, and still sat near the printer in the hamster corner. But her eyes didn't drop as quickly when people spoke over her. There was a calm fire building in her, not loud or explosive, but steady. The kind you find in women who've held back tears in the middle of crowded rooms and smiled anyway. The laugh still came sometimes, soft, cruel reminders that people like Laura didn't see her as an equal. They saw her as entertainment. At best, harmless. At worst, unworthy. But June no longer flinched. She studied them instead. She listened, quietly noticing what others missed. She saw which projects failed, not because of bad ideas, but because no one took the time to understand people like her. Small-town business owners, older clients. Folks who didn't speak in sleek buzzwords but held deep loyalty and common sense. One afternoon, Mr. Horace Belton called her into his office. She walked through the wide glass doors, past secretaries who barely looked up, and stood in front of his polished walnut desk. "June," he said, not unkindly, "I want your opinion on this vendor rollout." She blinked. "Me, sir?" He looked up from the report. "Yes, you. You understand the little guys better than anyone in this office. You speak their language." She hesitated, unsure if that was a compliment or a disguised insult. But then he added, "That's a strength, not a weakness." That was the first time someone in power had said that to her face. She spent the next hour walking him through a strategy she'd written in her notebook weeks earlier, but never dared to show anyone. He listened, actually listened. And by the time she left, her hands were shaking, but her steps were firm. Word traveled. Slowly, cautiously. Mr. Belton started requesting her input during meetings, and the tone in the room shifted. Laura still called her sweetheart, in a way that stung, and Cameron never stopped rolling his eyes, but the others started to take note. And not long after, a junior consultant named Myra, young, sharp, and always carrying a leather portfolio, slid into the break room beside June and said, "That was a brilliant call in yesterday's meeting. Where'd you learn that?" June smiled softly. "Just watching. Listening. Growing up in a bakery teaches you more about business than you'd think." Myra grinned. I think you've got more vision than half our department." She meant it, and it was the first time June heard those words without sarcasm attached. That night, June went home to her small apartment just outside Asheville. She opened her worn notebook and added a new section. Not just ideas for the company, but long-term dreams. Business models. Team structures. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was planning. The next month brought a storm. One of the firm's biggest clients, a retail chain with roots in Texas and deep pride in tradition, was threatening to pull out. The marketing team didn't understand their voice. The proposed rebranding had stripped away their country charm and turned their logo into something sterile and modern. "They think we're ashamed of our roots," the client had said in a fiery call. The office panicked. Laura was flustered, Cameron was defensive, and the upper team held an emergency meeting. Then, unexpectedly, Mr. Belton turned to June. "What would you do?" The room went silent. June felt every eye on her, but she didn't shrink. She stood, walked to the whiteboard, and began sketching out a campaign that kept the brand's roots intact. Warm colors, simple language, nostalgia-driven slogans. "They don't want to be something new," she said. "They want to be seen, respected, celebrated." The client loved it. The account stayed. June got her first official company-wide thank you email from Mr. Belton. Laura didn't say a word that day. She didn't need to. The silence said enough. 2 days later, June found herself standing in the elevator next to Cameron. He glanced at her reflection in the mirrored wall and said, "Guess the accent finally came in handy, huh?" She smiled without turning. "Guess it always was." He scoffed, but he didn't say anything else. Back at her desk, June received an unexpected email. Mr. Belton was forming a new task force, a pilot team meant to bridge the communication gap between the firm's upscale image and their more traditional clients. He wanted her to lead it. Her. The girl from the bakery. The one they used to laugh at. She stared at the email for several minutes before quietly standing and stepping outside. She called her Mama. Mama, she said, voice trembling with something between shock and joy. They want me to lead something. A whole team. There was silence on the other end. Then Mama laughed, a soft, proud sound. Of course they do, baby. They finally stopped listening to the noise and started hearing the music. June didn't cry this time. She smiled into the wind. Because she knew. This was only the beginning. The next few weeks were a blur of meetings, emails, and quiet milestones. June Whitlow, the woman once mocked for her small-town accent and gentle tone, was now walking into conference rooms with department heads following her lead. Her task force, now officially named the Bridge Team, was assigned to rebrand a series of regional clients that had long felt ignored by the sleek, big-city approach. And the person in charge of that was none other than June, the same woman who once ate her lunch behind the server closet because she didn't want to be laughed at. Her first team meeting was awkward, but not in a bad way. She had selected her team herself, deliberately picking a mix of overlooked employees, some fresh interns, and one surprising ally. Myra, the young consultant who had once complimented her insights in the break room. Myra was smart, kind, and curious, and most importantly, she listened. That made her stand out in an office full of noise. They met in one of the smaller conference rooms, which June had insisted on. No big tables or ego chairs, she'd told HR. I want conversation, not hierarchy. At first, some of the older staff looked confused, but by the end of the first week, even they were talking more freely. It turned out, when you create space for people to be human, they bloom. Of course, not everyone was happy about it. Laura pretended not to care, but she was watching. Her expressions in the hallway turned tight and polite. She no longer offered fake compliments. She didn't call June honey anymore, and that silence was louder than all her previous mockery. Cameron, on the other hand, was more direct. Let me guess, he said one afternoon as they passed by the front lobby. You're turning us into a company that speaks in Southern cliches now. June turned toward him and gave a small, even smile. No, she said. I'm helping us speak in a way people actually understand. That shut him up. But even in the progress, June felt the pressure building. Late nights became normal. She spent hours reading everything she could: marketing strategies, leadership books, client history, and brand psychology. She knew she wasn't the kind of leader people expected, and that meant she had to be better, sharper, and more prepared. She bought herself a small voice recorder and practiced speaking. Not to get rid of her accent, she'd stopped being ashamed of it, but to strengthen her tone, to speak with conviction. You don't have to yell to be heard, she told herself. But you do have to believe what you're saying. Then came the biggest test yet. Maple and Main was up for a massive bid. A Texas-based retail chain with over 120 stores looking for a complete brand revival. It was a contract worth millions, and every department was competing to pitch the winning concept. Mr. Belton gave each team 2 weeks to prepare, and said the winner would lead the client relationship moving forward. It was, without saying it out loud, a chance for someone to rise. Laura, of course, threw herself into the competition. She pulled late nights, barked orders, and handed out binders like weapons. Cameron joined her team. Together, they built a sleek, polished presentation, full of graphs, buzzwords, and glowing models of what the New South could look like. June watched quietly, then returned to her Bridge team. We're not going to try and outslick them, she said. We're going to show the client who they are, not who we think they should be. She flew down to Austin to visit some of the chain's top-performing stores. She spoke with the managers, the staff, and the loyal customers who came every Saturday for their groceries, their boots, their basics. She recorded their stories, their voices. She took photos of dusty signage and community bulletin boards filled with handwritten notes and bake sale flyers. Back in Asheville, she worked with a quiet intern named Zach, who was brilliant with video editing. Together, they built a presentation that felt like a story. It wasn't flashy, but it was honest. It opened with the sounds of a screen door slamming and ended with the voice of a 72-year-old customer saying, "This store is the heartbeat of our town." The day of the pitch, tension filled the building. June's palms were sweating, but she walked into the boardroom with her notebook, a small thumb drive, and a calm look in her eyes. Laura presented first. Her slides were sharp. Her delivery was flawless. The executives clapped politely. Then it was June's turn. She didn't have flashy music. She didn't use marketing jargon. She stood, looked each person in the eye, and said, "Before I tell you how we'll change your brand, I want you to hear from the people who know you best." She pressed play. For the next 5 minutes, the room was silent except for the soft sounds of laughter, footsteps, and sincere voices of people who loved the store, the way it was. Then June spoke again, outlining a respectful rebrand that kept the chain's identity, but modernized it in ways that mattered. When she finished, there was silence. Then applause. Real applause. Mr. Belton leaned back in his chair and said, This is the direction I want us to move in." That afternoon, she got the call. Her team won the pitch. The client signed a 3-year contract. June had done it, but she didn't cry. Not yet, because she knew the journey was far from over. Now the real work began. The success of the Maple and Main pitch changed everything, at least on the surface. June noticed the subtle shifts first. The people who used to glance past her in the elevator now offered tight smiles. The same executives who once ignored her emails began replying with "Great job" and "Well done, team." For the first time, her name appeared in internal newsletters, and her team, the Bridge team, was no longer viewed as a side project. They were seen as leaders of innovation. But underneath the polite nods and cautious respect, June could still feel it. That lingering discomfort some people carried when they had to take orders from her. Not because of her work. No, that was spotless. It was something else. It was the way she said certain words, the pauses between sentences, the slow and thoughtful rhythm of her southern drawl. And no matter how high she climbed, some people still saw her through the same lens they had when she was just the woman from the small town. That didn't stop her. It pushed her. She began mentoring new hires, especially the ones who looked unsure, the quiet ones, the ones with unusual names or hesitant voices. She remembered how it felt to be small in a place that expected you to sound big. She told them, "Don't let the volume of your voice measure your worth. Let your ideas speak for you." And slowly, people started listening. Her department expanded. Her title changed. She was now officially Director of Cultural Integration and Regional Branding, a title long enough to make her laugh. "They're finally giving me something to match my emails," she joked to Myra, who had now become her deputy. But not everyone was cheering her on. Laura remained cold and quiet, and Cameron looked increasingly annoyed in meetings. One afternoon, after a company-wide presentation, he cornered her in the hallway. "Don't think I don't see what you're doing," he said. "You're playing the underdog card. That won't last." June looked him straight in the eyes and said, "I'm not playing anything, Cameron. I'm just doing the job better." She walked away without waiting for his response. By the time the annual performance review cycle came around, whispers were growing. There was talk of leadership changes. Mr. Belton, nearing retirement, was reportedly eyeing someone for an executive role, a VP position, to be exact. June didn't dare believe the rumors. But still she prepared. Quietly. Diligently. One day, she received a calendar invite titled Executive Succession Planning, Confidential. It came from Mr. Belton's assistant. Her heart stopped for a beat. She wore her favorite navy blue suit that day. Not the fanciest one in her closet, but the one that made her feel most herself. Strong, simple, grounded. She walked into Mr. Belton's office with a calm she didn't entirely feel. He offered her tea. She declined. And then he cut straight to the point. "We need someone who understands where the market's going," he said. "Not just someone who knows strategy, but someone who can lead culture. You've done that better than anyone I've seen here in years." June blinked, unsure if she'd heard him right. "I want you to consider the VP role," he continued. "Of course, you'll have to go through board approval. But I'll back you." She didn't speak right away. The room felt too quiet, too still. Then she nodded. "Thank you. I'll earn it." That night, she walked home under the city lights of Asheville, her heart full and strangely quiet. No celebrations. No champagne. Just a warm cup of tea, a quiet call to her mother, and a deep breath. But life, as always, had its own rhythm. Just 3 weeks later, she received news that rocked her. Her father, who had been managing his health issues quietly back in Green Hollow, had suffered a stroke. June dropped everything. She took emergency leave and flew back to her hometown, unsure of what she'd find. Green Hollow was just as she remembered. The dusty roads, the quiet stores, the same neighbors who remembered her as June from the Whitlow farm. Her mother was holding up strong, but tired. The hospital visits were long and heavy. Her father, once the strongest man she'd known, was weak, unable to speak clearly. But his eyes lit up when he saw her, and that was enough. She stayed for 2 weeks. She worked remotely when she could, and every evening she sat by her father's bedside and read to him. Old letters, local news, even her own reports from work. She wanted him to hear her voice, strong and clear, the same voice others had once laughed at. One night, her father squeezed her hand and whispered, "You're more than I ever dreamed, baby girl." She cried quietly in that hospital chair, knowing those words would carry her forever. When she returned to Asheville, she was different. Stronger yet softer. More determined, yet more grounded. She walked back into the office with a kind of grace that only life's deepest moments can carve. 2 weeks later, she was officially named vice president. Not just for the title, not for the paycheck, but for what it meant. A simple woman, with a simple voice, and an extraordinary will. The one they mocked, now the one they reported to. Her name was on the brass plate now. Vice President, Regional Strategy, June Whitlow. She stood outside the office door for a long moment before opening it, fingers brushing the engraved letters. It wasn't about vanity. It was about every single time someone had called her not polished, every email they corrected because her phrasing was too country, every time they said, "You're not really leadership material." This plate proved they were wrong. The new role came with a different tempo. Board meetings, executive travel, decisions that shaped the direction of the company, not just her department. And eyes, so many eyes watching her. Some hopeful, some doubtful, many skeptical. At first, she tried to blend in more. She spoke slower in meetings, softened her twang, wore muted colors. But she didn't feel like herself. One night, after a long call with her mama, she stood in front of her closet and said aloud, "I didn't get here by pretending. I got here by being me." The next morning, she wore a sunflower yellow blazer to the quarterly strategy review. People stared. She smiled. Her leadership style was different, too. She didn't bark orders. She asked questions, listened hard, and remembered people's names, even the intern who brought coffee. She implemented a mentorship program focused on regional voices and diversity of thought, calling it Roots and Reach. But not everyone embraced the change. In one heated boardroom discussion, a senior executive named Trent, a man who had never masked his distaste for her rise, snapped, "We need to sound professional, not like we're running a church bake sale." There was an awkward silence. All eyes turned to June. She closed her laptop slowly, looked up, and said calmly, "Trent, I'd rather sound like a church bake sale than like someone selling cold air and empty words. At least I know how to feed a community." Some of the team chuckled quietly. Others looked stunned. Trent said nothing. And from that day forward, no one mocked her speech in front of her again. One of her biggest challenges came 6 months into her role. A merger proposal with a West Coast tech firm that was struggling but offered promising AI retail integration. June was wary. The data was shaky, and the CEO of the other firm had made a dismissive remark in a preliminary call. "We like to move fast. We don't have time for slow talk in small towns." That was all she needed to hear. She flew to San Diego herself, wearing boots, curls loose, and her accent loud and proud. In the boardroom, she didn't just talk numbers. She told stories of Southern customers, of loyalty built over years, of the richness that came from people who may not talk fast but think deep. By the end of the meeting, the tone had shifted. The CEO said, "You made your case. I get it now. Your customers aren't behind. They're just rooted. The merger didn't happen." And June was praised for her clear judgment and defense of company values. Back in Asheville, the culture within the company began to shift. HR reported a spike in regional hires from smaller towns. The internal training programs now included communication-style diversity. And one surprising outcome: sales in the Southeast grew by 24%, as marketing campaigns began reflecting more authentic local voices, accents and all. One afternoon, she received a message from a woman named Lila Hastings. It read, "Dear Ms. Whitlow, I just wanted to say thank you. My daughter has a speech difference, and she's always felt like she wouldn't belong in corporate life. She saw your interview on TV. She said, she sounds like me. That's all." You gave her hope. June printed it out and placed it beside her computer. One day, she was walking through the hallway when a new intern stopped her. I'm from Georgia, she said nervously. And sometimes people make fun of how I talk. But I saw you lead the last earnings call. You didn't change a thing. And you crushed it. June smiled. Thank you, darlin'. Let them hear you. The world's got enough people trying to sound the same. But beneath all the victory, June still remembered her early days. The sting of laughter in the elevator, the looks, the remarks. And she knew there were others walking through the same fire. So she didn't slow down. She hired people who reminded her of her past self. She gave them chances others wouldn't. And she taught them to believe that dignity wasn't given by a title or a polished voice or a designer label. Dignity was standing tall when others tried to shrink you. It was holding your ground when the world told you to change. It was being exactly who you are. Let me know when you're ready for Section 6, and I'll continue from this point. The first frost settled on the windows of Asheville as winter crept in. For June Whitlow, the cold only sharpened her focus. As the company prepped for its annual leadership summit in Chicago, she was asked to deliver the keynote address, an opportunity that would place her in front of thousands of executives, industry leaders, and potential investors. The request came with a subtle suggestion. Would you consider using a speech coach to soften the edges a bit? The assistant to the CEO asked hesitantly, not making eye contact. June didn't flinch. She simply replied, I think the edges are what got me here. Behind her smile, though, was an ache she hadn't felt in a while. Even now, with all she'd earned, there were still whispers that she didn't fit the mold. The summit would be nationally televised. A stumble in front of that audience could set her back years, or confirm every prejudice ever whispered about her. She spent nights rehearsing, not to perfect her accent, but to strengthen her story. She wanted to make sure her words carried weight, not polish. But then, an unexpected obstacle hit just days before the summit. Her mother, Iris, was hospitalized after a fall down the porch steps. June rushed back to her childhood home in Boone County, staying up with her through the night, holding her hand while machines beeped around them. I'm fine, baby, Iris whispered. Don't you miss that big meeting? You worked too hard. I'm not leaving you, June replied. You held me when I cried because kids laughed at the way I talked. You sat on the porch with me the night I got rejected from college. Everything I became started with you. They sat in silence for a while, and then her mother said something that stayed with her forever. You don't need a stage to prove who you are. But if you take that stage, speak for every girl like you who's still hiding her voice. The morning of the summit, June stood backstage at the grand ballroom of the Hilton Towers in downtown Chicago. Glittering chandeliers, polished suits, scrolling tickers, all of it screamed big city. She walked up to the microphone with calm conviction. No papers. No teleprompter. She began slowly, her southern cadence unapologetically present. When I was 12, a teacher told me I'd never be taken seriously with the way I talk. When I got my first office job, my manager told me to tone it down. When I got promoted, a colleague asked if I'd be embarrassed speaking on behalf of our company. The room was silent. But let me tell you what my voice has done. It comforted a crying customer in Georgia when her order got lost during a storm. It trained a young woman from Alabama who thought she'd never make it in corporate. It convinced a boardroom in San Diego to turn down a flashy merger and keep our soul intact. Then she smiled. My accent doesn't make me less professional. It makes me authentic. And people trust what's real. The crowd rose. Applause erupted, louder, longer than she expected. A few executives from rival firms even stood up to clap. Afterward, people approached her with thanks, admiration, and stories of their own. The event was a turning point. June became a symbol, not just for Southern representation in corporate spaces, but for regional authenticity across the country. Small-town professionals began sharing their stories online under the hashtag #VoiceLikeMine. A few weeks later, a major business magazine ran a cover with her photo and the headline. She didn't change her accent. She changed the game. Still, not everyone was happy. Trent, her old nemesis in the boardroom, filed a formal complaint accusing June of favoritism toward employees from non-traditional backgrounds. He claimed her programs undermined long-standing corporate standards. At first, it rattled her. Old insecurities whispered in the back of her mind. But then she reviewed the program metrics. Increased retention, stronger performance scores, broader customer satisfaction, and record-breaking profits from underserved regions. Her methods worked. She met with the board, laid out the numbers, and calmly dismantled every point in Trent's complaint. When she was done, the room was quiet again. The CEO, Mr. Bartholomew Crane, a man known for his silence more than his praise, finally spoke. "Ms. Whitlow," he said, "we need more voices like yours, not fewer." Trent resigned the following week. With her credibility fully cemented, June took another bold step. She created the Southern Voices Leadership Academy within the company, designed to train and promote professionals from overlooked communities in small-town America. The mission? To find people whose voices had been dismissed and give them the tools to rise. Her first cohort included a shy young man from Kentucky, a fierce woman from Mississippi who wore cowboy boots to meetings, and a Texan who had been told he sounded too slow for sales. They reminded June of herself. At their graduation, she stood before them and said, "Don't try to fit in. You were made to stand out. The world needs your voice. Speak with pride." They did. And as their voices echoed through the halls she once walked alone, June realized that dignity wasn't just holding your head high when others tried to bring you down. It was lifting others, too. When you're ready for Section 7, let me know, and I'll continue. When spring arrived, Asheville's tulips bloomed along Biltmore Avenue, and the company's Southern Voices Leadership Academy celebrated its first full year. June Whitlow stood backstage once again, this time at an internal company gala honoring her academy's graduates. The ballroom was filled with colleagues, mentors, and executives who had watched her journey from that timid assistant with a small-town accent to the vice president who reshaped corporate culture. As she stepped onto the small stage, June noticed faces both new and familiar. Myra, now a senior consultant, waved from the front row. The young man from Kentucky gave her a shy thumbs up. The Texan with the soft drawl nodded proudly. Even Mr. Belton, retired but in attendance as a guest of honor, offered an encouraging smile. It was a gathering of people who had once been afraid to speak up, and now spoke with confidence. She could still feel the echoes of Laura's laughter and Cameron's eye rolls from years ago, but those sounds had faded into the background, replaced by applause and genuine respect. June took a deep breath and began. She spoke of their shared stories. Stories of being underestimated, of fighting small battles in big rooms, of learning to trust their own voices. Each word landed softly but firmly, a reminder that authenticity carried power. Later that evening, as the gala wound down, June mingled among the guests. A group of senior executives approached her, led by the CEO, Mr. Crane. He congratulated her on the Academy's success and quietly offered her the opportunity to lead a new global initiative, adapting the Southern Voices model for their overseas branches. "Your approach transcends borders," he said. "It speaks to people, wherever they come from." June felt a familiar flutter of nerves. The thought of reaching beyond the U.S., of standing on another international stage, was daunting. Yet she remembered her mother's words. Speak for every girl who's still hiding her voice. If her own journey could inspire someone across the ocean, she would find the strength to do it. That night, June called Mama. She shared the news, her voice trembling with both excitement and fear. Her mother laughed, then said, "You were never meant to stay small, baby. Your voice was meant to cross oceans." 2 months later, June found herself in London, standing before a group of regional managers for the company's European operations. Their accents varied, British, French, German, Italian, but the nervous smiles were the same. She began her workshop by inviting them to share a common phrase in their own dialect. Hands shot up. Good morning, bonjour, guten tag, buongiorno. Laughter rippled as they heard themselves, the slight mistranslations and the warmth behind each greeting. June smiled broadly. Accent is our badge of identity, not a barrier. She guided them through exercises in storytelling, encouraging each manager to share a moment when their accent had shaped an experience, good or bad. As they spoke, she noticed something magical. The room's energy shifted from polite formality to genuine connection. By the end of the session, June had helped them craft culturally authentic campaigns for local markets. Campaigns that celebrated, rather than erased, their unique voices. She closed by saying, "When we honor our own stories, we give others permission to tell theirs." Back in Asheville weeks later, she received an email from a senior executive in Tokyo. It read, "Your workshop changed our approach. We are launching our own Voices program here." Another from Sao Paulo. "We never imagined our accents could be our brand strength. Thank you. June realized that her small-town drawl had become a bridge across continents. Yet despite her international success, June remained grounded. She continued her weekly visits to the small bakery where it all began. She'd sit in a corner booth, chat with the staff, and sometimes help package biscuits for the early shift. When customers complimented her on her title or her travels, she'd laugh and say, "I'm still just June from the bakery." One morning, as she packed a box of scones, a young baker asked, "Ms. Whitlow, how do you stay humble after all that success?" She paused, butter knife in hand, and said, "Humility comes from knowing where you started. No matter how high you go, never forget the smell of fresh dough and the sound of your mama's voice guiding you." That evening, June sat on her porch swing with Mama. Fireflies danced in the dusk. They talked about the year's milestones, the academy's expansion, her global workshops, the small victories that hadn't made headlines. Mama smiled. "You used your voice to give others theirs." June nodded. "And in doing so, I found mine." The porch settled into comfortable silence, cradled by cicadas' song and the soft glow of lanterns. June looked at the framed letter from Lila Hastings on her porch wall, the mother of the girl who saw herself in June's accent, and felt a surge of gratitude. It was proof that voices carried weight, that authenticity invited connection. She closed her eyes, listening to the night. Somewhere, in homes across the world, people were speaking their own truths, because she had dared to speak hers. The town of Asheville had changed over the years, but June Whitlow's small white cottage with the teal shutters remained the same. The ivy still curled over the front porch posts. The creaky swing, sanded and painted every spring by her own hands, still groaned comfortingly when she sat on it. And her mother's roses, now cared for by both June and a local gardener, bloomed a little fuller each year. It had been 5 years since June took the position of Executive Vice President of Global Cultural Initiatives, a title that still felt surreal when printed beneath her name on crisp letterheads. But despite the boardrooms and travel, she made it a point to return home every quarter. Not just to recharge, but to remember. As she walked down Main Street on a Saturday morning, passing the bookstore, the flower shop, and the bakery that once held her long shifts and quiet dreams, people waved to her like they always had. Not because she was famous now, or a figure in glossy internal magazines, but because she was still June, the girl with the strong coffee order, the one who helped box up donuts when the morning rush got heavy, the one who had never let her roots tangle. She paused at the corner coffee shop, glanced through the window, and froze. There, at a back table, sat Laura Quinn. The same Laura who once tossed her accent into the air like it was trash. But now she looked older, her eyes softer, her hair pulled back in a loose bun. She was dressed in simple clothes and typing on a laptop, her posture slouched and shoulders curved slightly inward, a mirror image of the old June. June considered walking past. She owed Laura nothing, but she pushed open the door instead. The bell jingled, soft and unassuming. Laura looked up, and when she saw June, her fingers froze over the keyboard. Their eyes locked. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Laura stood. "June," she said, "I didn't expect to see you here." Her voice carried no arrogance, just surprise, and maybe something close to regret. June nodded. "Hi, Laura." Laura motioned toward the other chair at her table. "Would you like to sit?" It felt strange, almost cinematic. But June, ever gracious, did. The chair creaked beneath her. They talked. Not about the past, not directly. But in soft, careful tones, Laura told her she was working freelance now, doing small consulting jobs. She admitted she'd left the company a few years ago. "It got too noisy," she said. "I didn't fit in anymore." June sipped her tea and said nothing. Then Laura looked her in the eye and said, "You were right, you know. About your voice. About all of it. I was too proud to see it." June felt a flicker of something. Was it anger? No, just a deep ache of things finally coming full circle. "I used to think my accent was a weakness," she said softly. "Now I know it's my greatest strength." Laura nodded slowly. "You changed things. For a lot of people. For the company. Maybe even for me." It wasn't an apology. Not in words. But it was more than June had expected. They parted with a polite smile. No promises to keep in touch. Just closure. And that was enough. Weeks later, June stood at a ceremony in Washington, D.C. She'd been nominated for a National Leadership Award honoring women in business who had made significant cultural impact. As the keynote speaker introduced her, he said, June Whitlow didn't just climb the corporate ladder, she rebuilt it. She took the very thing others mocked her for and turned it into a cornerstone for thousands of others. June walked onto the stage, the lights bright, the room silent. She looked at the faces in front of her, diverse, hopeful, expectant. She cleared her throat and spoke slowly, proudly. I was once told my voice didn't belong in boardrooms, that it was too soft, too southern, too unpolished. But I'm here to say, your voice, just as it is enough. Because dignity is not in how you sound. It's in what you stand for. Applause thundered. Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't blink them away. She wanted to remember this. Back home in Asheville, the same letter she'd once written to herself, the one scrawled in a bakery apron pocket, was now framed and hanging in her office. It read, "One day, I'll walk into a room, and they won't hear just my accent. They'll hear my story. They'll know I belong." She had become the woman she wrote about. And through her journey, she helped others believe they belonged too. She wasn't just a boss. She was a beacon. And her voice, once mocked, was now an anthem echoing far beyond any boardroom.